others to possibly be privy to. So we're going to begin tonight. Let me just lay out for you very quickly. Again, thank you and welcome to Justice and Beyond. My name is Pastor Gregory T. Manning. I'm pastor of Broadmoor Community Church, where no perfect people are allowed. One of the co-moderators for Justice and Beyond, along with Sylvia McKenzie and our youth co-moderator, Trevor David Bryant II. We're going to follow the following format for tonight. We're going to begin with a word of prayer, as is our custom at Justice and Beyond. Then we will also continue forth with our just some housekeeping issues, just to give you some background about who Justice and Beyond is. And then we'll go right to our forum, our presentation on tonight, and hear about that until about 6 o'clock. And then we'll give opportunity for those who are participating on the call to ask some questions and call for any actions that we want to take away from this. And then we'll close up right around 6:30 or 6:40, hopefully around 6:30 tonight. And so with that said, let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Give a moment to just focus that we have just concluded another Earth Day, in which we are reminded of the fact that the scripture that I hold sacred and that many hold sacred, and in my faith tradition, says that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. We have a responsibility to care for the earth and care for creation and care for those who inhabit this earth at this moment for this appointed time. So let's remember that at this time. Oh God, we give you thanks and praise that at this moment we have been given the opportunity to do life together on this planet, that you have given to us as an incredible gift, a gift that blesses us each and every day with all that we need, with water and food and air and companionship upon this earth. However, God, we also remember that there are so many people who do not have the benefit and the blessing and the privilege of having clean air and clean water and clean soil. Many of our brothers and sisters up along the river who are poisoned each and every day, and we are not far from it, sharing the same water, the same air. And so, God, we ask that you would give us a greater sense and urgency to care for this earth, that you will remind us that for this moment we have been given as stewards and managers of this planet. And so, God, we ask that you would continue to raise up our youth to understand that privilege, and that they would begin also to just assert their power in making this world a better place. We ask now, God, that you would bless us during our time together now, that we would have ears that listen and hearts that learn and receive. I ask it in the name of Almighty God. Amen. As we begin tonight, again, welcome to everybody. If you are not receiving our Justice and Beyond newsletter that we send out every week and sometimes twice a week with important information, please make sure that you give your information, that is your email address, to Ms. Brooke Randolph, that you'll find her in the participant list. Give your email address to her so that we can make sure that you're getting our newsletter on a regular basis. Just want to let you know that Justice and Beyond has been continually meeting for 9 years, and we continue to do so. We're grateful for this format of Zoom, that we can do so until we're able to meet again in person. We always want to make it clear that we always want to be a Black-led organization that amplifies the voices of brown and Black people. We stand along with our allies, but we want to make sure that we amplify the voices of brown and Black people on primarily 4 different focus areas that we're focused on. That is education, criminal justice, environment and health, and let's see, what am I forgetting? Education, environmental justice, education and health, and what is the fourth one? I heard somebody say it. Criminal justice. I thought I said criminal justice, Sylvia. Housing.
Yes.
Housing, yes, housing, yes. All right, so those are the 4 areas that we're focusing on. And so we will continue to organize around those issues as we come together. Again, we look forward to the time that we'll be together back again. I want you to know that this is a collaboration and a collective effort as a coalition, that we want to continue to build justice and beyond. We want people who are want to organize with us, who want to be considered as pillars. A pillar is someone that signs up to say, I want to be a part of the management and the programming and the forums of justice and beyond and planning. That we need your help. That's all I'll say about that. And so if you want to be a pillar, just let Sylvia McKenzie know, or Brooke Randolph, or Ernest Johnson, that you want to be a pillar. We could really use you and use your help in leading justice and beyond. And so with no further ado, we're going to continue with our program for tonight. It's exciting to just be empowered by information and the work of the data center. But first, let me say this. I want to see if Senator Joe Bowie is on first before we hop to that. Is Senator Joe Bowie on, Sylvia?
I don't see him as of yet.
All right. Just to let everybody know, there is going to be a very important meeting of the school board on tomorrow. Right. As many of you know, Justice and Beyond is not in favor of the experiment called the charter school system. And Senator Joe Bowie has been working on legislation in order to make sure that there is appropriate supervision and oversight of the charter school system, and that has been lacking for a while. And there are opponents of that are going to be expressing that in the school board meeting on tomorrow. But we're asking you to show up, and Senator Bowie will be on to talk about that hopefully a little bit later. So let's continue with our regular scheduled program for tonight. And so we want to hear from Mr. Lamar, who is from the data center. Let me just have all of our guest speakers on tonight introduce himself real quick, and then I'm going to go to the top with Brother Lamar as he gives his report and tells us about his work. So let's see, Lamar, you just want to say, give us a minute and a half of just introduce who you are.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lamar Gardier, the Executive Director of the Data Center. Been doing this work for about 5 years with the Data Center, worked in city government for a bit before that. I am a native New Orleanian, left for just a little bit for grad school, but came right back after Katrina. The Data Center is a data intermediary, which basically means that we are paying attention to the issues that really matter in our community and trying to make available data and analysis that can be used to make good decisions for those issues for the greater prosperity of the region. That's all right. We are, and thank you for inviting us this evening.
Thank you. We'll hear from you more in just a minute. Thanks for coming tonight. Nikki Luke, would you please tell us about yourself?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation to be here this evening. I'm Nikki Luke. I'm an assistant professor of geography at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And most of my research has considered workers in the energy sector. And I've been working with labor unions and environmental justice groups for about 8 years now. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Nikki. And Nick Hayden.
Good evening, y'all. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's a real pleasure. I'm a professor in geography at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. And a lot of my work circulates around racial justice, economic justice, and environmental justice.
All right. Thank you, Nick. We appreciate you being here. And Logan Burke.
Hey guys, Logan Burke. I'm the executive director for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. Apologies, I was running a bit late. I'm really looking forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say today. I know a lot of you here have already heard from me a lot about energy costs in Louisiana. And so it's good to hear from other people what other people are thinking about it and thinking around energy in Louisiana. So I will kick it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Logan. We appreciate you being here. We're going to go back to the top, and Lamar, if you would just take some time, tell us about the data center's latest report, And then we're going to ask the guest speakers tonight to link this to their work and some actions that they can see coming from it. So Lamar, you have the floor for about 10 minutes or so.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought I had 30 minutes today.
Yes,
So,
yes, we'll give you 30, Lamar. We'll make it work.
okay. All right, great. I
Okay.
had a 30-minute presentation prepared.
Yes, we'll do that. Do you need screen sharing?
I do, yes.
Sylvia, Elizabeth or Brooke, we got that ready?
In the meanwhile, I will tell you just
We're
a little
good.
bit about the report that I have here. The body of work that I'm going to speak from today is called the Prosperity Index. This is work that we did leading up to the city's tricentennial in 2018. And the intention was to look at New Orleans's history, particularly from the civil rights movement on, to determine whether or not Black New Orleanians has seen better or worse outcomes since that time period. As far as we know, it's one of the first times that anyone has looked over that long of a time period across many different indicators to understand what the circumstances for Black people have been in our city. So without any further ado, I'll jump into that presentation. Data center, this is what I was just telling you, Prosperity Index. I'm going to focus on just a few aspects of this presentation, ones that connect to the areas of focus for justice and beyond. We start off with employment and income, and just go back to the beginning a little bit and try to understand what New Orleans was in 1718 or so. It was one of few regions that was settled by the French and eventually Spanish. And that meant that the rights afforded to people of color and the enslaved were somewhat different than the rest of America. There was an opportunity in some small ways to participate in the economy that would change significantly later on. But as it were in those early days, it made it such that New Orleans grew very, very quickly and had a very diverse population, attracting people from across the Caribbean and across parts of America, such that by 1840, it was the third largest city in the country. Now, at about that time period, the state began to impose increasingly restrictive laws and policies on people of color, which then, of course, limited the growth of the city. We then continued to fall in terms of our relative rank, in terms of population throughout the country, until we get to current day, where we're now, down in the 50-something percent in terms of largest cities in the United States. So what's clear is that we were strongest when our state laws and our practices and behaviors allowed for the natural diversity that this city could support. We began to get increasingly weak as we began to restrict people. Over our 300 years, the first 150 were during slavery. The next 100 was during Jim Crow. It's only in the last 50 years has it even been possible for Black New Orleanians to fully participate in the city's economy. And so that's really where we start this conversation from. And if we look there, if we look at about 1980 or so to 2016, which is where the data for this report stops, from 2016 to now, there doesn't look much different. So it's not that we're missing anything, but we can see clearly over that time period that in 1980, there was a significant gap, but that gap only continued to increase over the decades leading up to the present time, such that 63% of Black households earn less, and 47% of Hispanic households earn less than their white households. Half of all Black families in New Orleans earn less than $25,000. I should correct what I said. Those Black households were earning 63% less than the white households. The Hispanic households, 47% less than the white households. Again, with half of all Black families earning less than $25,000. If we break that income number down a little bit, we can really see where how the inequity shapes out here in our city. The lighter blue areas here are the lower income quintile, meaning the numbers of folks who are making under $23,000. The purple is the highest income quintile, which is people making over $114,000. We can see that for Black households, the for white income households, the highest income quintile has grown from 24% in 1979 to 29%, whereas the share of Black households in this same tier shrunk from 9% to 6%. Black households in the lowest tier grew from 41% to 47%, and for white households shrank from 23% to 14%. So it begins to show you how the inequity in terms of income is playing out in our region. When you think about income, the most common way for folks to get income is through their jobs. And so if you look at what happened in New Orleans between 1980 and 1990, and then proceeding from there, it starts to give you a sense of what happened to our city and why we're having so much difficulty today. Between 1980 and 1990, significant trouble with the port and in the oil and gas industry, a significant loss of jobs there caused men of all colors, Black, Hispanic, and white, to lose employment during that time period. You can see a significant decline for each of those demographics. From 1990 forward, we see a recovery of jobs for white men and Hispanic men, and we see an increase in terms of jobs for white women, Black women, and Hispanic women from 1980 all the way to now. It is only for Black men that we see a continued loss of employment from 1980 through 1990, and then continuing into the current day, with employment for Black men never recovering after that loss in 1980, pointing to significant weakness in the ability of our families to support themselves and to have a sustaining income that would allow them to live lives above a living wage. That leads directly to poverty. We have a high poverty rate in our metro area, 28% of Black, 21% of white, and 10% of, 21% of Hispanic and 10% of white people live in poverty in our metro area. It means the poverty rate for Black people is 3 times the level for white, and for Hispanic, 2 times that of their white peers. Poverty rates for Blacks in New Orleans are higher than in the metro, and in turn, the metro is higher than the United States. So we see significant issues in terms of poverty in New Orleans, which of course relate to many of the other issues that we are faced with today, including the main issue that you all are here to discuss today. Different from the poverty level, there's a conversation about the living wage, right? The living wage is the amount of money that you need to make to simply survive in the city without needing any kind of government assistance or anything like that. Here's the baseline level that you need to survive. This number, as we've calculated here in 2016, is based on 1 adult, 1 child. This number changes for different family configurations, but at that family configuration in 2016, it was $22.89 per hour, or about $48,000 a year, which was required to live in New Orleans, a reasonable life in New Orleans. That meant that 71% of Black households were below that living wage. 31% of white households and 56% of Hispanic households fell below that threshold. And so we see, even beyond poverty levels, significant problems in terms of our Black families having the income necessary to live a reasonable life here in New Orleans. This number is from 2016. The living wage amount now is actually quite a bit higher now in New Orleans. It's about $6 per hour higher than it was just a few years ago. These issues around income lead to, predictably, problems in terms of wealth. So we see that Black New Orleanians are nearly 2.5 times more likely to be in liquid asset poverty and more than twice as likely to be in a household with 0 net worth than their white peers. If you don't have a level of wealth available to you, meaning that you don't own your house, have no equity being built in the house, significant debt, and little money in the bank account or a savings account, then it makes it very, very difficult for you to survive any of those shocks or even just regular stresses that we come against in our regular life. So if you have an unexpectedly high power bill because you are in liquid asset poverty, you have a very difficult time paying that power bill or that water bill, whatever it may be, and still having enough money to pay your rent, buy food, and things like that. This is the situation that many of our households find ourselves, given the long history of income disparities here in New Orleans. as you might then imagine, we have issues with child poverty. Child poverty has been pretty steady in our city with uh, about 48% of Black children being in poverty in 1979 and about 47% in 2015. So it's been fairly steady in terms of poverty for Black kids, going from 12% in 1979 to 9% for white kids in 2015. So you see a real gap in terms of child poverty. We know that child poverty affects so many things on into adulthood, including your ability to effectively learn and absorb that education that you might be receiving in your youth. I'm going to jump over into housing for a bit. And again, I'll kind of start from the beginning and point to this map where we can sort of see how New Orleans was laid out in the early times. You can see this commercial core area in the middle. That's where the French Quarter was. And then around that, we see areas of high risk, meaning that they flood a lot, and high nuisance, meaning that they have pests and things like mosquitoes and things like that. And then areas of low risk and low nuisance. These are areas that are higher, don't flood as much, are not, we're not swampy, flooded areas when New Orleans was established. Well, unfortunately, people in New Orleans were divided in terms of where they could live, depending on these areas of risk and nuisance. White New Orleanians were allowed largely to live in those areas of low risk, low nuisance. Some of our immigrants and people of color in New Orleans were forced to live in those areas of high risk, meaning that they flooded a lot, and high nuisance, meaning that there was, again, a significant set of problems with pests and mosquitoes and other issues, such as when there's a hurricane or what have you, those areas were going to be more vulnerable because the lands did not drain. These issues around segregating around geographic risk was only reinforced by redlining, which created a public policy way to keep people into those divisions. Of course, we know that this also led to differences in terms of home valuations, therefore the amount of wealth that individuals had, and being locked into neighborhoods that essentially predicted your outcome, given the disparities that might exist in those neighborhoods. This chart, if you can look quickly, just reinforces that idea that if you are born into a neighborhood with low economic mobility, there's a very high chance that you will, even in your adulthood, only be slightly higher in terms of your earning potential. You have a greater chance of getting higher if you were white than Black, but for either one, if you were born in a disadvantaged neighborhood, you will have, in large part, a more difficult time reaching a higher income later in life, which is why it's really important that Black people were relegated to these neighborhoods that had significant disadvantage built in, made it much harder for them to achieve higher income later in life. And you will see that play out here in terms of home ownership, where African Americans had only 41% of Black New Orleanians own homes, whereas 54% of white New Orleanians own their homes in 2016. This is actually one of those indicators that where the gap has slightly narrowed over this 40, 50 year period, but a significant gap does still exist between Black and white.
Lamar,
yes.
Lamar, Senator Bowie is only able to join us for about 5 minutes, and he just had an adjournment of the session,
Yes,
and is headed to another engagement. Can I just let him speak for 5 minutes about this important charter school
absolutely.
issue?
I will pause the screen share. There we go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
No problem.
All right, Senator Bowie, you there?
Yes, I am, Pastor Manning.
All right, appreciate you being here on this very short notice, and we're eager to hear about your update on what's going on with your legislation and what's going on with the school board on tomorrow with those who are opposing the legislation.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, as you all know, I was offering Senate Bill 404, which was a bill that would return back to our elected school board their statutory powers and authorities regarding operational autonomies that are granted to charter schools. And so I learned this morning that the Orleans Parish School Board had called a special meeting with one agenda item, and that item was a resolution to oppose my bill that would give them their statutory authority over charters. And so obviously, once I heard that, it was very undaunting for me because my case for action, as you know, was the fact that in 2019, when we measured the extent to which student achievement was after 15 years and $7 billion of taxpayers' money, 73% of our kids were not performing at grade level compared to 63% when they took our schools in 2005. In addition to that, the legislative auditor released an audit that said that the state of Louisiana had implemented a flawed educational charter experiment. And so because of those two very important data pieces, it was necessary to say, well, okay, we need to stop this autonomy by the charters and non-accountability by them and get back to our elected school board, their statutory authority. That's basically what the bill does. Basically, the school board is saying that they don't want their statutory authority back over the autonomy areas that were granted by Act 91 to the experimental charters. And so that's what the issue is. They are planning to do a resolution opposing the bill.
All right. This is the very disturbing information. I'm going to give any couple of people who have questions opportunity to ask questions, but we need to know what we can do to support you, Senator Bowie.
I am asking, and once I heard that, I called one of our radio stations, WBOK, and asked them would they share that with our community. I called a couple of other community organizations who I know who have been fighting for our children even before I got involved in 2016 as a legislator. And so I've just asked folks to pass the word. And if our community can, I would ask them to please be at that meeting because they expected no one to be there, and they were going to oppose the very instrument that could allow them the opportunity to change the direction of what's happening with this failed and flawed experimental piece for our kids.
Real quick, what's the reasoning behind that? What's the basis for opposing?
Their resolution addressed the fact that, and of course, several of the things in the resolution are totally inaccurate. If you like, I can read you the resolution.
How long is it, sir?
It's well, you know, it's a lot of whereas, but let me just give it to you in a 411.
Thank you.
Basically, it's saying that one, that because we're an all charter system, my bill would negatively impact the autonomies that were given to the charters. They say about a local school board. In truth, the local school board didn't give them that. Act 91 gave them that. It was a piece of state legislation. Two, they said that I did not contact them nor others regarding the bill. That's totally false because I called each board member individually, had a conversation with all of them except one, that was board member Romero. And my initial conversation was, I want to give you a heads up on a bill that I'm going to author that gives you back your statutory authority within Act 91. At that time, the bill had not been dropped. I said, what I will do once the bill is dropped, I will provide it to you, and hopefully I can get your support. I collectively sent that to the school board members. Haven't heard from any of them, individually or collectively, until this morning when I heard they were doing this particular piece. So what they want me to do, they're asking me to defer the bill, and they're asking the committee to defer the bill because they're feeling more conversations need to be had, which is a Trojan horse. I mean, when you have the two data sets I just told you, why would you not want to assume what you elected to do? Have your authorities and powers to run your schools.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I know people, several people probably want to ask questions about this. I can only take 2 questions because we do need to get back to our other program for tonight. But I'll take 2 questions if you have time, Senator Bowie, and please make them questions and not so much comments about the situation. Sylvia, do you see any questions?
I don't see any hands up. Oh, yeah,
Okay.
I see some now.
Oh,
Wait a minute, it's
okay.
two just came in.
All right.
I'm trying to see which ones are those. Just a second. Waiting on them to pop up, Pastor. I don't see, they said participants, but I don't see the names who have their hands
Let me ask
raised.
this. Does anybody have a quick question for Senator Bowie? All right, if there are no questions.
I can see people's hands.
Lane Tripp does first and then Sayero does second. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lane.
There we go. I'm confused about one thing. I would think that if they get control back, authority back over the New Orleans public schools, they'd be making more money. I don't understand. I mean, in their own unenlightened self-interest, I don't understand why they don't want that authority.
Any comment about that, Senator Bowie?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, ma'am. You know, the school boards by constitution are elected to run their local schools. Ours were taken away. That is, the board's powers and authorities were taken away with the state implementing our all charter system. Act 91 institutionalized their lack of power. When it brought the schools back, what I'm attempting to do with my bill is to give them back their power so they can have the authority to try and turn things around for our students in our community.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Siharu.
Yes, real simply, a simple question. This is by intent, no different than placing people in areas in the city where there's squalor and no opportunity to achieve higher goals or higher income levels. Can we assess this as a state-run operation by intent to privatize, but then again, diminish education when you send them to charter schools?
Well, actually, you have just articulated what has happened to our school system over the last 15 years. One, it is now privatized because a charter is a contract that is given to a profit or nonprofit entity to run your schools. And two, you have actually taken from the electorate, the citizens, their right to have their elected representatives run their schools. We don't elect any of those boards that each of the charter has as their own board. So the right for representation has been taken away, well as the constitutional statutory authority of our elected board to run our schools.
All right, Senator Boyd.
It's only in New Orleans, 64 parishes.
Yes. I'm getting some feedback from a phone. Please go ahead and mute your phone or your device that you're using. Senator Bowie, thank you. Do you have an address for that school board meeting? We're having trouble locating it.
Let me get the hot sauce.
It's on that school board office on De Gaulle. I do not have the address.
Okay, on De Gaulle.
Yes.
If anybody has that information, please put it in the chat so that we all might have it. And those who are able to, please get to that meeting. Let's surprise them and let them know that we are not in agreement with this experiment that they've been doing on our children for far too long and been damaging them and traumatizing them. So let's get there and show up. Senator Boyd, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We support you. Please continue to let us know how we can support you and any other updates that you may have for us.
Pastor Manning.
Thank you.
Pastor Manning, excuse
Yes.
me, Ms. Darlene wanted to know, can she ask her question, please, before Mr. Bowie leaves?
Real short.
Come on, Ms. Darlene. Hello,
Miss Arlene?
Ms.
All right.
Darlene.
Miss
No.
Darlene. All right, we got to go. Thank
Okay.
you, Senator Bowie. Appreciate you. God bless you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Pastor.
All right, you're welcome. Let's go back to Lamar. Sorry about that interruption. Would you please continue, my brother?
No problem at all. Happy to yield the floor for a bit. So getting back to where we were talking about housing and the home ownership rates for Black and white New Orleanians. That leads directly into the rental space, though. Nearly 60% of Black New Orleanians rent, and more than half of all renters paid unaffordable costs in 2016, as compared to 41% of renters nationwide who pay unaffordable rents. So, what this lays out is that fewer Black people are able to own their homes. So a significant number are renting, but rents have been too high in the city, creating a circumstance where income does not keep up with the rent, therefore making it much harder for people in New Orleans to continue living in New Orleans, many then needing to find cheaper living outside of the city, which introduces a significant other set of problems. We have quite a few slides and a little bit of time, so I'm going to jump on over to health next and try to hit these very quickly. Age-adjusted mortality from cancer, heart disease, and stroke have all fallen since 1999, which is great news. It means everybody's living longer. But still, Blacks are 56% more likely to die from cancer or heart disease, and 49% more likely to die of stroke than their white peers. Which means that there are still systemic weaknesses in the health system leading to these disparities. We know that this is not simply the result of Black people living riskier lives or different lives than white people, or eating different foods. These are systemic issues that cause these health differences. When we look at the rate of low birth weight babies born to mothers, we find that only 7.3% of white mothers in New Orleans had a low birth weight baby, whereas 15% of Black mothers had a low birth weight baby. This is one of those indicators that pushes back on the idea that all of these problems are related to socioeconomics and not race. What we see here is that even for a white mother who has only a high school degree, her chance of having a low birth weight baby is lower than a Black woman who has a master's degree, which again pushes back on this idea that it's socioeconomics driving the disparities. Socioeconomics here do help to determine what your chance is of having a low birth weight baby, but the difference between Black and white doesn't stand up to the socioeconomic test we see again with significant differences between Black and white. Jumping on over into education. So essentially our history in New Orleans in terms of the education system is broken up into 5 periods. There's the early times where education was very segregated. This is prior to the Civil War, where we had things like John Madonna, schools opened and such, moving on into the post-Civil War period in Reconstruction, where we actually had a significant number of schools being built for Black kids here in New Orleans, and a push to integrate schools even in this early day around Reconstruction. Unfortunately, we then moved into the Jim Crow era, which brought a resurgence of segregationist activities. And we can see that even though the enrollment for Black students was increasing for high school students, the state chose to reduce the funding available for those such schools in New Orleans by 80%, such that there simply were not the appropriate number of Black schools to educate our Black New Orleanians during that time during Jim Crow. Moving to the Civil Rights era, where we saw desegregation orders. What we also saw largely in the school system is white kids at that time leaving the school system altogether, related to white flight, people leaving the area altogether, going to suburbs and places where, in many cases, Black New Orleanians were not able to move. That created a school system very, very segregated, with very few white students and a larger majority of Black students. Moving us into the post-Katrina times of education, where we see this full charter system taking hold. Early on, from 2015 to about 2016 or so, education performance seemed to increase, but then plateauing about that time and starting a slow decline from that period on. There remain many challenges, of course, with the charter system. Busing is an issue, the problems with teacher retention, insufficient funding still for students in schools, racial disparities abound, and continued high levels of segregation during this period as well. So when you get into the data, you can see, and this data is from 2013 to 2017, and that's specifically because that's when ACT data was, well, that's when everyone was required to take the ACT, meaning that the data then for each school and each race was comparable because everybody had to take it. So once everyone was taking the ACT, we see that on average, our white students were averaging a 25 on the ACT, Black students under an 18, 17.6, which is important because TOPS requires an 18 for a 4-year scholarship. So that what that means is that many of our Black students were not getting ACT scores that qualified them for the state tuition scholarship program. You see down at the bottom set of charts here, you see again a significant segregation between Black and white students in terms of who's in the public schools versus the private schools. Many more Black students in the public schools, many more white students in the private schools. New Orleans is different from many places, whereas nationally about 10% of kids are in private school. In New Orleans, about a third of kids are in private school, which underlies the major issue in our education system, that there are too few kids from a broad set of incomes that participate in the public school system. That means Black families who are middle class, white families who are middle class, Black and white families upper class, are choosing a private school far too often instead of leveraging the public school system, which if they did would be to the benefit of all students in New Orleans. Interestingly though, when you look at ACT scores between public and private schools, you see little difference in terms of their scores, which means that the private education isn't necessarily better than the public education, even though there is significant, people are making choices in one direction or another. That choice is not necessarily based on academics. For Black students, the average score in private school was about 19.5, about 17.2 in public school. White students, 25.3, 25.2, so about the same for private and public schools for white students. Hispanic students, however, did see significant benefits to being in private school versus public school. 24.3 for private, 18.4 for public schools. And when we look at educational attainment here in New Orleans, we have relatively high educational attainment in New Orleans relative to the country, and that is simply because we have a high number of universities here in our city. So some people come here, for school in one of our local universities. They stay, drives up the educational attainment rate in the city. Nevertheless, you still see significant disparities between Black and white. Mid 80s for white New Orleanians, low 40s, 42 for Black New Orleanians, for Black males, 55% for Black females. So again, significant disparities in terms of college attainment for New Orleanians here. Summing it up, what this shows is that Blacks are 2 to 8 times more likely to have bad outcomes in New Orleans. Black children 5 times more likely than white children to live in poverty, and 8 times as likely to score below basic on K through 12 tests. Regardless of which of these systems you look at, whether it be criminal justice, economics, health, youth, you see a significant difference between outcomes for Black and white New Orleanians, which again underlies many of the concerns and problems here in the city. If you do want to go into more depth on any of this information, much of this can be found on our website. As I mentioned, this data came from the Prosperity Index, but we also have a series of papers that go very deeply into the history of these individual systems and give data for those individual systems. I would invite you all to read some of that if you'd like to see that history and have a broader view of what those disparities look like and how they were formed in those systems. And that is my time today. Thank you very much for making this space available for us to show you this data. Hopefully it's helpful in your discussions afterwards. The website is datacenterresearch.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamar. Incredible work as usual. We greatly appreciate it. Hold on, just hold on. My phone was going off there. Incredible work as usual. Let me see if anybody has any questions that they want to ask Lamar real quick. And remember that in this space, we want to give space and take space. So if you've already asked a question, let's give somebody else an opportunity to do so. So are there any questions? Sylvia, do you see any questions for Lamar at this time?
No, not at this time. Oh, yes, Mr. Bernard. Mr. Ben.
Yeah, just a quick question. You remember when affirmative action came into play historically, not only here in New Orleans, but all across the broad South and throughout the whole country. You don't hear much about that anymore. Do you think that's still in play, or is it just kind of faded behind the scenes?
I think many of the policies that undergirded affirmative action still exist. It's simply that the way those things are carried out, the way some of those policies are carried out simply haven't been effective enough to close some of these gaps. Policy that was put forth well before the middle of the 20th century really determined the outcomes of Black and white people early on. And we've been following those same trajectories ever since. No matter what's been put forward after that, regardless of how much it was said to help one group or another, that policy has been undercut, underfunded, or regulated to pieces such that it isn't effective to do the job of closing racial disparities as suggested. There are policies on the books right now that could cut child poverty in half in Louisiana if they were appropriately funded. But we don't do those things. And so therefore we continue to have the racial disparities and poor performing economy as a result. So.
All right. Thank you for that answer, for that question. One more question,
Next.
Sylvia, do you see?
We had two more hands up, Raymond Sweet and Mr. Dennis.
How you doing? So my question for you is, as the COVID stops and more jobs or whatever comes along and all the CAs that the government does, is any of that positively impacting the underemployment rate of Black males? So these new companies like DSC, X, or whatever the name of their company is, are they hiring Black males? And these organizations, a lot of non-for-profits in the city, are they hiring Black males and Black females to work for them, or are they just existing and contributing to the impoverishedness of Black folks in the city?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's take it in two parts. So in terms of the COVID stuff, excuse me, we know that disasters tend to exacerbate existing trends. So if there was a trend in terms of difficulty for employment for Black men prior to COVID, though there was a temporary bump in terms of people receiving support to kind of buoy them through the COVID period, once that support trailed off, we just see a return back to those same issues. So we see a significant gap between employment for Black and white, just like we had it before. Post-disaster, folks with resources tend to do better. They tend to get access to the jobs faster. People who had fewer resources before the disaster tend to do worse post-disaster. They've been damaged by that disaster and have a decreased ability to recover post-disaster. And we see those exact same things playing out here. What I do think is interesting, though, is that the idea that simply giving people income to help them survive, for a long time, that's been talked about as a positive thing that does lift people out of poverty and does not necessarily impact their desire to work or anything like that. It just puts them on stable ground so they can be able to make, regular decisions and go about their life. And that is one thing that COVID did show. During the time when people were receiving support, a significant number of people were actually lifted out of poverty temporarily. It did not impact the numbers of people who were interested in work, sort of proving the point that if we implemented programs such as universal basic income, guaranteed income, whatever it might be, such that people were able to live a life out of poverty and make decisions about their lives outside of having to worry about whether or not they can pay the bills, that students were able to be educated without the stresses that poverty brings along, then there would be better outcomes. And simply giving people the money that they need to be above that poverty threshold is sufficient to get that, well, is effective in getting that done. It may not be all that needs to happen, but it does help to get that done. But again, once that money trailed off, people return to the circumstances that they were in before. Are companies that are moving into our city hiring Black males at the rate that they are supposed to or even committed to? I do not have that data in front of me, but because I worked in a similar area in my previous career, I know that in many cases people are not meeting those commitments, and either they seek some relief on that commitment, or they rework the commitment often, but they're often not able to meet those work requirements, which isn't necessarily surprising. These are sometimes very high level jobs that require significant training, and our education system has not trained us by and large to be available for those kinds of jobs. I think that same thing tends to be true in the nonprofit space as well. I do not have, again, those numbers in front of me to say whether or not that is the case in our own nonprofit. We do take significant effort to try to hire people of color, but we even have, despite our significant effort, we do sometimes have a hard time finding people of color to be hired, given the specific skill set that we sometimes need. And so it does continue to be a problem. And any economy must look to its education system first to produce the education levels, the academic levels in its population that's required. We know we have the innovation and intelligence, everything we need here in the city, but we need the education system to really do its job.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Lamar. Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions. We've got to get to our three other panelists that are here. Lamar, thank you. You were our main guest, and we appreciate that. The others are simply going to respond to their connection to your work, and so we appreciate all the work that you've done and your time tonight. So thank you, sir, and we'll certainly be talking to you further. And your information is in the chat, right?
The website is in the chat. I can drop my email address there too in the event that anybody wants to contact me.
Please do. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Lamar, it was a shame because I had some good questions for you.
I would email them to him, Brother Ciara. We just don't have the time. Let me move on. Nikki, Luke, we want you to connect your work, if possible, to what Lamar has said, to all that he has said, or to as much as possible of what he said on tonight. And I'm going to give you about 7 minutes.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I am here tonight in connection with a paper that I co-authored with Nick Heinen. And so do you coordinate? I don't know if Nick, did you want to go first?
Sure, yeah, I'll set it up a little bit. And I think it's especially appropriate given some of the other people on this call and how this research has come to be. Theo Hilton, whose little box is somewhere on the screen, who is a PhD student at Tulane and does a lot of community work. I was standing in his second floor living room in Mid-City looking off, and I saw a solar panel. And for whatever reason, it just struck me. And I immediately texted Nikki, and I was like, what do you know about solar in New Orleans? And for the rest of that day, we kind of had a text thread going on as Theo and I drove around the city, trying to get a sense of where was there solar and where wasn't there solar, as geographers were interested in these kinds of questions about spatial variability, or like where is what and why. And as I dug into it, I found the Alliance for Affordable Energy quickly enough as the kind of authority on these questions, and Logan Burke's name came up. I reached out to Logan, and without knowing me, she very graciously said she'd be willing to talk. So we had a quick conversation, about an hour actually. It was a long conversation, and then my brain just started to explode around the possibilities of community solar as a resource. And I think that this does fit very nicely with some of the things that Lamar was just talking about as far as access to various kinds of resources. Well, come to find out that Theo was going to interview Logan on WHIV not that long soon after I had spoken to her. And so Theo and I and Nikki kind of coordinated some questions a little bit that I don't actually know, Logan, if you ever knew this, to kind of set you up, just to kind of get you thinking about some of these things a little bit more. And that interview went really well. And one of the takeaways that we took from that was the way in which community solar programs geared toward low-income communities strive to address energy poverty or energy insecurity by working around the financial and infrastructural impediments for renters and other customers without adequate infrastructure or the upfront capital to finance a residential solar energy system. And Logan can surely go, or Nikki can surely talk more about this, but New Orleans is very unique in the way in which the city council has been passing measures to open up some greater flexibility and authority there. Where I really kind of dug into this was I'm very interested in the history and geography of reparations, and have done work with and on the Black Panther Party and other kind of folks, 60s up through the current time. And there was amazing insight that Nikki had found in some of the work that she was doing from Manny Marlborough, who really lamented the fact that energy had not been brought up into the mobilizations of the 1960s, that people were talking about land and housing and various very important resources, but that energy hadn't quite been articulated as one of those really important desires. And so as a result, through a lot of the politics and social movement formation that kind of came out of that moment, energy wasn't at the forefront. And so what we did in this paper, and we'd be happy to share it with anyone that's interested, is we kind of started to dig through a little bit the history of reparations, going back to the 1830s, going up through the 1865, when Reverend Garrison Frazier advised Major General William Tecumseh Sherman about, you know, what freed people needed in order to recreate a society around emancipation. And that's where Special Field Order 15 and the notion of 40 acres and a mule, although there's no mention of a mule in this document, but the 40 acres are clearly mentioned. If we go almost 100 years later, we get to James Forman, who worked with SNCC and the Black Manifesto that he and others associated with SNCC kind of created, which was a very long list of very granular and important policy-oriented issues and questions that they argued Black folks needed in order, again, to kind of get the jump that was necessary and that still hadn't been made possible in the United States because of the tendencies of long history of white supremacy and other structural features. But in the Black Manifesto, there are discussions in there about investing in land, investing in technology. And so it kind of gets a little bit closer as a statement about reparations that gets us closer to energy, to get us to think about energy justice. So essentially what we kind of do in this paper, and I'll turn it to Nikki so she can say more, or Logan so she can say more, or Theo, who's also here, he can say some things, are trying to reimagine how does energy justice come into this conversation in a way that allows for folks to mobilize around it, as is already happening, but in this longer historical tradition, and see it all as part of one very important goal and one very important mission. Nikki?
Sure, thanks. And I guess also, so maybe jumping off from Lamar's work, and thank you for that presentation and that history. And I think often, so most of my work is about urban geography, and geographers are very invested, as Nick already described, in thinking about how space is produced, and housing in the built environment is obviously a huge component of that. And there are these disparities in home ownership and home valuation by race. And importantly, as the previous presentation showed, those are largely due to the results of government policies that have constructed and invested and subsidized mortgages and created this racialized wealth disparity in the United States. And what we see in the context of access to solar is that and distributed generation solar, so people who are able to have solar on their rooftops, is that these disparities largely play out in similar ways when it comes to who is able to have both the cost of financing solar up, both able to put down a deposit to buy solar panels to put on their roof up front, who has a home with a roof of adequate quality to host solar panels on it, who's able to do the tree work to put solar panels on a house might be an issue in certain places. And so there's really great research, particularly at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, that has looked at this on a state-by-state basis, kind of tracking that on average, the people who have solar on their rooftops are whiter and wealthier than their county average. We do see a slight difference in this in the state of Louisiana compared to other states across the US, but in large part that's not due to people owning the solar that's on their roof, but leasing it from a third-party provider. And so part of what we were interested in is connecting the history that Nick described to also asking how that's related to some of the fiscal policies, so the actual tax policies that led solar to become so popular, and that also led to this enormous preponderance of third-party financing. And so I can very briefly detail that history. Again, we're happy to share the paper with anybody who is interested. But in 2007, Louisiana adopted state subsidies for distributed generation solar. And the state senator who did so, who proposed the measure, said, why is Louisiana just a leader in the fossil fuel industry? Why not be a leader in alternative energy too? And these subsidies were the most generous in the United States. They offered a 50% refund for the cost of installation on the first $25,000 of a residential solar system. And that was in addition to a 30% federal tax refund. So people were getting a lot of money off on their taxes for installing solar. So already we see that this is particularly beneficial for people with a large tax burden, for people who itemize their taxes. And this has obviously, some of these incentives have changed a little bit since the tax policies adopted under the Trump administration, but this was a very generous tax credit. And initially the bill had a fiscal note attached that it would only cost the state $500,000. So when these tax credits were first adopted, the solar market grew substantially. And by 2013, the program cost Louisiana more than $40 million. The tax credit was amended in response to a budget shortfall in 2015 to cap incentives and phase out the state subsidies. Nevertheless, Louisiana invested more than $147 million into residential solar infrastructure through this tax credit, which is mostly helping people who are homeowners. And that follows some of these unequal patterns across the US. We see is that in New Orleans, 80% of all tax credits were funneled through a solar leasing company. So the company would get, this is up to 2017, the company would get that tax credit instead of the homeowner. And so the homeowner still gets the discount on their electricity bill as a result of having solar. They still are contributing to and benefiting from clean energy, but they don't get some of the other benefits of the government offering this tax incentive to finance solar. And so it's really a question of not only providing access to energy, but providing access to the wealth accumulation benefits that can come from owning a solar array on your house, which has been linked to an increase in property values. And it has other long-term benefits of giving you resiliency and the ability to generate electricity at your home. And so there are all sorts of ways in which we can think about this question of how distributed solar is financed and how people access distributed solar. But what we also tried to look at in the context of this paper is that this is kind of an inadequate, this is only part, distributed generation solar only addresses part of the question of inequality in energy access and energy affordability that the city of New Orleans and really much of the United States faces. And so we see in New Orleans in particular that low-income households have one of the highest median energy burdens in the United States. So they spend upwards of 10% of household income on average on household energy costs, which it sounds like Logan has talked about before and might be able to dig into a little bit more. And this is particularly true for renters, for Black and Latinx households. And these questions of being able to pay for energy can begin to be addressed through designing energy policies differently and providing access in part to solar in different ways, which is what a community solar program is designed to get at. In part is helping address some of the costs of solar and provide access to clean energy policies. So I'd be happy to talk more about kind of disparities in energy and really answer any questions, but I can also turn it over to Logan, who might be able to provide more city-specific information.
Well, thank you, Nikki. We appreciate what you've offered us and given us tonight. I want to see if anybody has any questions for you before we move on to Logan.
Yes, sir. VP have a question. I don't know if he want to ask it.
Sylvia, you can read it for me. Thank you.
Okay, will do. How are poor people disadvantaged by the policies leading to obtaining solar panels and lowering their utility bills? Nikki?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different ways to answer this question. In part that many poor people don't have access to solar at all. And this is, so you can only get solar on the roof of your home if you own that house. And there are other structural, like the roof has to be, you have to have an adequate roof, you have to have good access to the sun. It's not possible for every roof to have solar. But if you're a renter, your landlord might not put solar on the roof. Or if you if you are not able to finance the cost of getting solar panels upfront. So there are many barriers to poor people, especially renters, in getting access to solar. And then for those who are homeowners who are able to access solar, but do so through a solar leasing provider, the solar that's on their roof is actually owned by a third-party provider, and they are leasing those solar panels. And so they still see the credit on their utility bill, but they don't have as many of the benefits in terms of the returns it might give to their overall home value. Does that answer your question?
All right. It sounded like a good answer to me. And I appreciate that, Nikki. Let me see if there's any more questions for Nikki.
Yes, I just wanted to also ask Nikki, my name is Sylvia McKenzie. After Katrina, we did get some solar panels in some of the areas, especially in the lower Ninth Ward, that was given through government programs. But the problem is our people, Black people, don't find out about these government programs to really assist us, and they had so many flying around after Katrina. Then after a while, when they was pushing it into the Caucasians and Jefferson Parish, we was left out in Orleans Parish. So we really need to see how we can make a change and get some of these benefits to the Black and brown people.
Nikki or Nick, any response to that?
I mean, I think that's a really important question. And I think it's also a question of so there's also a question in the chat from Mr. Arlene about how do homeowners who were not afforded this tax relief, is there a way for them to get it back? So it's a similar question of not knowing about this policy at that point in time. And I think, and I would definitely defer to Logan on this, but that policy was seen as so expensive, it was discontinued at the state level. And solar is now cheaper than it was back then. So there have been technical improvements so that the panels themselves don't cost quite as much. There's still all the labor costs and everything else, but I think that's a question now of how do we make policy that's better to address what we know was a program that did give solar to some, but didn't work as well as it should have.
All right. Thank you for that answer. I'm gonna we're gonna have to move on to Logan at this time. So Nikki, thank you. If you'll stay on, and maybe there'll be some more questions for either you or Nick, but we definitely appreciate you being here tonight and laying out this information for us. Can you share your contact information in the chat so that anyone who wants to can continue to get information from you? All right, let's move on. Logan Burke, we are always grateful for you taking time to be with us. And we want to get to some solutions, some actions. What do we need to do in order to make sure that we eliminate the disparities that lie in this area of utility justice?
Yes, sir. Hey, everybody. I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible. And the very first thing that I want to point out here is that so many New Orleanians are renters. And as Nikki pointed out, the solar sort of system, or the sort of traditional distributed solar generation process, is really only historically available to folks who own their own rooftop and whose rooftop is ready to take solar. And so therefore already that leaves out more New Orleanians than it includes. We are a majority renter city, and the majority of our communities that are low income and that are Black and brown are the ones who are renters. This means that right up front, even if the solar was free, the solar panels and the installation and everything else was free to install, it would still leave people out. And so in a city that has, and I'm just going to show you guys a really obvious impact situation here. Oh, I can't share my screen, but that's okay.
We can probably get it, Brooke, or
somebody just made me a co-host, so I will show you guys. So this image comes to us from some of our allies who live in Atlanta, who've put together an energy burden map. And right where you think it is, where the darkest of the colors are, those are the areas in the city that had the highest energy burdens. Wouldn't you know it, those are also the areas in our city that had the highest heat island impacts. That means that these very same corridors, which, oh, by the way, and I'll bet you the data center could double down on this, are high percentage of renters. The differences in this cooler area and even further uptown where the map doesn't show that it would be blue, the difference on a hot summer day can be 18 degrees. 18 degrees between this part of town and this part of town on the same day in August. That means that whether you've got solar or not, you've got to deal with the fact that your house is hotter if you happen to live in Central City, in the 7th Ward, in parts of Gentilly, and in parts of New Orleans East. And so right there, we're dealing with that much more energy that is needed to keep people not just comfortable, but safe and healthy on a hot August day. And so this is one of the reasons that we think that community solar is going to be a really important element of solving this problem. Now, the purpose of community solar is to enable folks who don't own their rooftop, who don't have a rooftop that's ready to receive solar, or that live in a community that, for example, has historic limitations for solar. So, for example, even if you live in the French Quarter, the purpose of community solar, and I'm going to show you guys an image here, and it's not mine. I'm borrowing it from our friends at Groundswell, but give me one moment. The idea behind community solar is that it would work in the same way that solar on a rooftop would, in that you get credit on your bill for power that's generated by a solar facility somewhere in your community. So not necessarily on your rooftop. The New Orleans City Council created a community solar rule that can enable this to happen here in New Orleans. And what it looks like is somewhere in New Orleans, some people might call it a solar farm or a solar garden, if you will. It can even be on top of, let's say, a warehouse rooftop or the Port of New Orleans rooftop. A solar facility is installed somewhere in the city, and a subscriber, that could be anybody on this call who lives in Orleans Parish, can subscribe to that facility and get ownership and say, and then that subscription company that manages that field says to Entergy, account number 3278, say that's Miss McKenzie, account number 3278, she owns X% of this solar field, and therefore her panels generated 37 kilowatt hours this month. You are now required, Entergy, to credit Ms. McKenzie's bill 37 kilowatt hours. Now, that's just a number off the top of my head. What that means is that if you live in New Orleans, you get a credit that reduces your bill based on that number of kilowatt hours. The city council's rule, and this was in the interest of equity, actually gives low-income residents in New Orleans a higher value for that credit for those kilowatt hours on your bill. So for example, if I'm a low-income customer in New Orleans and I'm a subscriber of a community solar facility, I get just as much value as somebody who has solar on their rooftop, meaning if my panels generated 37 kilowatt hours, then I get a subtraction from my kilowatt hour usage at exactly 37 kilowatt hours. In New Orleans, the city council did not afford everyone what we call virtual net metering, which is that one-for-one credit. Instead, they listened to Entergy's request that reduced the value of that kilowatt hour. And so 37 kilowatt hours equals, let's say, a credit on your bill that subtracts around 20 kilowatt hours from your bill. This was a big fight between advocates and Entergy and some of the council's advisors at the time. But what we fought really hard for was that low-income residents in New Orleans could benefit at the same value as people who have a rooftop, who could afford solar on their rooftop, and have roofs that were ready for them. And so we thought it was incredibly important for the council, at very least, to give low-income customers that access. Because guess who in New Orleans is most in need of those extra kilowatt hour credits? Well, of course, it's the folks, hang on, got to stop share, and then I got to reshare. I'm almost done. Sticking with me. I really appreciate it. It's those very same folks who live in Central City, who live in New Orleans East, who live in Treme. It's these folks with the high heat islands who have high energy burdens. Let's go back to this one, who have these high energy burdens in the dark purple spaces. Those are the folks who need that credit the most on their bills. So what we have to do now is get these facilities built. Part of the struggle of that, or part of the challenge, I'll say, is going to be financing these projects. So this is something that we are particularly interested in, helping communities find the financing for this. And when I say financing, I don't mean necessarily just debt. I mean, we're looking at federal programs. So for example, through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which many of you have heard about as the bipartisan infrastructure bill, has lots of programs that are available or supposed to be available for communities for exactly this kind of thing. This is another one of the reasons that organizations like ours have been pushing so hard for some of the programs that are called climate justice development block grants that would have been in the Build Back Better bill and could still come out of whatever is being negotiated in DC. It's exactly these kinds of federal programs that can help with the financing so that it isn't just the folks who live uptown. It isn't just the white folks who've got the money to go get, to go get a home loan or something like that. What we want to be sure is that these community-owned projects, whether it's an installation on top of a church, which could also be part of a community lighthouse that many of you know about, or it could be on a field. We know that we've got a lot of abandoned property in New Orleans, and that means opportunity for installations of these kinds of projects. I'm going to stop there, and I'll hand it back over for questions.
Let me just say this, Logan. First of all, thank you. And when we talk about these facilities being built, I'm connecting in my mind this conversation, as many of us have at Justice and Beyond, to reparations and the need for reparations. And when we look at the detrimental effects of what redlining has done and the tremendous effects of not only enslavement, but also Jim Crow laws, that if Black folks were located in and near Audubon Park, they wouldn't need these facilities. But I think reparations dictate that these facilities be built first in Black communities and nowhere else. That should be, we should be on the front line of where these facilities are built, and we need to demand that federal dollars be given so that they can be built directly in these impacted communities first before anywhere else in the city. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I want to add to that something, actually, Reverend Manning, I think is really important, which is that the Biden administration has said, it was one of the very first things he said when he came into office, is Justice 40. And what that means to the Biden administration is that 40% of the benefits of all of this big spending should go to disadvantaged communities, the communities that have been overburdened and disinvested in. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. And so what I think our job is, or what I think part of my job is to make that Justice 40 real and connect that precisely to what New Orleanians need. The communities that have been left out of the traditional energy economy, the communities that have been frankly harmed by it, should be right up front and should have all the resources moved in your direction.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the efforts around Justice 40 that the Alliance and some of our other allies are trying to work toward, to get some of that federal money to fund these community solar projects so that they don't have to, quote, pencil from a corporate perspective. That's not what this is about. What this is about is building wealth by reducing these energy burdens and growing opportunities in communities that have been left out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Logan. Let me see if there's, could probably take about 3 questions before we have to end. We'll be a little bit over time, but let me see who has questions. Sylvia?
So far, I don't see any hand as of yet.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Logan?
There go one, Mr. Dennis. And then Mr. Ben.
Since Entergy robbed the poor people, do they have any intents to buy into building these constructs for solar in the communities in which you describe and the facilities themselves, instead of just having to go out and look for other funds, leaving that then again up to the destitute people who've already been robbed? What does Entergy intend to do?
Unfortunately, what I have to report to you right now is that what Entergy would like to do, or what they have applied to do before within the city council, is build some of these facilities and charge customers more for them and earn a profit on them. So rather than saying, we're going to build community solar in a way that actually benefits those who've been left out of the traditional clean energy or dirty energy economy for that matter, so far what we've seen from Entergy is they want to charge more for it, and they want to earn a hefty profit on top of it.
I got you, Logan. I'm saying that the indictment is that they stole.
You're not wrong.
Listen, I'm saying the indictment is, don't charge me again. You stole. I'm speaking of board members. I'm speaking of the structure itself. and the way its mandates lie out, helping the wealthy and never the impoverished. I'm saying that that's where the indictment lies.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Ben Gordon.
Yes, Logan, this has been interesting. I was trying to follow how, I'm not quite sure I follow. I mean, I could look online at, I can look online and find out from your website, but how renters would benefit. In my situation, I think it's very unusual. There's several, there's in the building I'm living in, there's 3 apartments and 1 commercial facility. And I think there's just one on that particular, just one, because it used to be a large single family home, but it's divided. So what he does, he incorporates it into our rent, and he's pretty reasonable for the rents. Now, I think he's a nice guy. I think he's unusual. He's an unusual landlord because he wants to make some profit because he still has to do repair, but I think he doesn't try to gouge his renters. I get along with him very well. Now I'm unusual. I get a very reasonable rent, and he did tell me that if I use air conditioning, if I put in an air conditioner, he's going to charge me more. But I live without an air conditioner since '82 by choice. So, and some people can't do that. But anyway, I was trying to follow how, like I said, my situation is unusual.
Mhm.
It would probably be easier if they did it that way, but I don't see how you judge how each renter would be, much electricity be if they don't have their own separate meter. But you don't have to, if it's long, you don't have to answer that because I know we're running short on time, and I can always look it up on your website.
I'd be happy to do a whole hour presentation about community solar and to bring some experts who've been really successful at making community solar accessible in other parts of the country that we're working with right now to try and make this happen. So I'd be really happy to do it. I want to respect folks' time, but Ben, I'm so glad that your landlord or homeowner is able to help you guys in that way.
Logan, hi, it's Juliana.
Hey.
Just a quick question. So how much would it cost to subscribe to a community solar project?
So it entirely depends on a number of factors. One factor may be, for example, if the facility is renting or leasing land, or the scale and scope of the installation. It also depends on whether the facility was able to draw down some federal funds or some other grant funds. It depends on some, if, for example, we were able to get the legislature to pass Bill 80, I think it's 6 this year, which Representative Freeman is putting forward, that would enable communities and low-income individuals to invest in solar and storage. So I know that's not a satisfying answer because it depends on so many elements, but what I can say is in some other places, folks are paying, $10 or $12 a month and getting 50% off of their bills. I mean, it really just depends on the location and lots of details. And I would love to come back to you with some clearer numbers. And so I commit to you that I will work on that.
Thank you.
You're muted, Pastor Manning.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. All right, thank you again, everybody, for being here. Logan, thank you. Nikki and Nick, Lamar, thank you all so very much. We appreciate you tonight. This was an incredible discussion tonight that we will certainly be continuing. We're gonna end with any closing announcements that anybody has of any events that we need to be made aware of so that we can show up, especially on tomorrow at the school board. Please be there. Hopefully we got that address. Be there, advocate for our children. Any other announcements that anybody has at this time? Any other events, announcements that we need to know about? All right, I'm not hearing any, so we're going to go ahead and.
I got one. Justice and beyond, you rock.
Thank you. Thank you, CRU. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you to all of our pillars, everybody who just shows up, and let's continue to build this. Let's end in prayer. Let's see. Sylvia, would you end us in prayer, please?
Yes, sir. Everyone bow your heads, please. Father God, we just say thank you for the privilege and the opportunity to be on this call this evening. As we all know of the injustices against your people, Father God, we are all working for better. So we ask that you continue to send the resources that we need, continue to let us unite together and become more powerful than ever before. Diversity is on the rise for us at Justice and Beyond and in our hearts, because that's what it's going to take, Father God. We have only one Father God for us all. So I ask you, Father, continue to teach us, lead us, and guide us, and give us the strength to go forward, Father God. But unite together with one another on one accord, so your manifestation could take place throughout the land, and it will, Father God. So we say thank you, Father, in advance for all the blessings that you are sending our way. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen and amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sylvia. God bless everybody. Y'all be safe, and we'll see you next week. God bless you. Bye-bye.
God bless everybody.